Hey folks, this is Jake here at Canadian Cutting Edge, and today we're taking a look at a neck knife. This is a GNOME. I say that because they come in a variety of different ways. Designer is Jesper Voxnaes. You might know him from the CRKT Pilar and now the large Pilar. Who wants me to review the CRKT large Pilar? Let me know in the comments below if you want me to review that knife. But this knife is the GNOME. And it's a tiny little knife. And when I'm saying tiny, I knew it was tiny when I was deciding to review it and stuff and pulling it up. But I'd never actually had one in my hands in person before. And so I could just go off of what I was thinking I was seeing. And I was thinking, even though I looked at the measurements, and this happens to the best of us, which I am, of course, humbly saying, just kidding. I am not an expert. I am not a guru. I am not a genius. I'm a knife guy with loads of experience who likes to share what he knows with anybody who's interested. Anyhow, this knife I thought was going to be a little bit bigger. It's a very tiny knife. These gnomes come in this 440C steel, which this one is. Some of them you can find with 12C27. You can find them with, this one's a canvas micarta. You can also find them with wood, namely olive. You can find them with STAG handles. So there's a whole bunch of different ways. And Jesper has designed larger models with different names of this same basic design. So there's lots of this kind of thing around. So if you're interested, stick around. The review's coming at you right now. First off, the sheath. You actually have two options. You can get a Kydex sheath. A lot of the gnomes can come with a leather sheath. I have not had the leather sheath in my own hands, but I can show you a couple pictures, if I can find them, of what the leather sheath looks like. The Kydex sheath is, reasonably well made. You've got this bead kind of chain on here, and that's about 30-pound test chain, 30 pounds of pulling force on it, and something's going to snap somewhere. So that's reasonably good for hanging around your neck. It's not going to break easily and fall off or anything. And it's thin and it's light. I don't prefer chain. It tends to get, it feels cold in the back of my neck. So I prefer paracord, but that's neither here nor there. A lot of these neck knives that I'm going to review come with this paracord. You do have these holes. They are big enough that you could use some kind of system to turn this into a belt sheath. So you could do that if you wanted to. Let me just double check that. If it's 1.5 inches apart, yeah, there you go. That's pretty close to 1.5 inches apart. It might take a very tiny modification, but yeah, you could put that on some kind of belt system. You've got an indentation right there that corresponds to right here, and so the knife goes in, and listen to it. Clicks in place. It holds in there really snug. The other day, this cut came from this knife, and I skinned the top of my knuckle. I didn't skin. I took a little chunk out, a small oval off the top of my knuckle. I was wearing this around my neck, and I was playing with this, and this I've added myself. This is a bungee cord type stretchy cord, elastic, and I was just pulling on it, and it popped out. I was pulling on it with this hand, and so the spring pulled it out and then went and sliced off just a little bit at the top of my finger. Every time I've cut myself with knives, it's always been when I was goofing off. I mean, goofing off is a dangerous thing to do. I've never cut myself, working, because I tend to pay attention to what I'm doing, but I don't know. I guess I got to stop goofing off a little bit. So there you go. This one, like I said, 440C steel. You could get it with 12C27. The 12C27 tends to be a little more pricey, by about a third or more. This one, I really like this really bright orange liner. And then you've got, that's probably G10. And then you've got canvas micarta. And you've got those two holes pinned together. It's really, really nice look. I really like the look of this. And like I said, you can get this in olive and you can get it in stag, and there's probably other ways of getting it as well. So what you've got is a little knife where you've got room for your index finger and then your thumb up here, It's fairly wide steel here. I think it's 3.5 millimeters if I remember correctly. So you can rest your thumb on there for a fair bit, but you basically have a one finger, one thumb hold because this is an outside curve. You know, you just can't get a great hold on it. A lot of these come with a knotted or coiled up lanyard. That's good because then you can get some grip in there. I could add knots into this and make it have the same kind of effect, and that would be very helpful. This one shipped with no lanyard at all, and it really does need something on there if you want to have good hold of this. I was thinking of putting this on here just so I could put it around my hand, so I'm less likely to drop it. You know, if I let go of it and want to do something else with my hands for a minute, it's a way to carry it without holding on to it. But now, when I find out how sharp this sucker really is, Bandit, no. I got to go take care of Bandit first. I won't be holding it by this rubber band, basically, anymore, and letting the knife dangle because this thing's sharp. I measured it, the sharpness factor. I'll mention it again later on when I do the measurements. It's 75 grams of pressure to cut through that filament, whereas a lot of the knives that I'm reviewing are in the low 200s or the high, 175 and higher. On the scale that I use, 200 grams of pressure to cut through that monofilament that I use is considered a sharp knife. And so this thing is at 75. So this is very sharp, easy to cut yourself with out of the package. So be yourself careful. And there's some other reasons why it's so sharp, and I'll tell you that when I go through the measurements. You're going to want to listen to that part of the video. At least the blade part, maybe not the handle specs. So very sharp out of the package. We've got a technically, well, some people, it all depends who you ask. This is a sheep's foot because there's a belly on the knife, but it's very close to a Wharncliffe. It's pretty much a straight blade. I'm just calling it a Wharncliffe in this case. It all depends on how specific you want to be with the definitions. But what we've got is a blade that's got a deep hollow grind, very pronounced, drop in the front here. So it can't pierce. You're poking it this way. You might nick your skin a little bit because the tip is very sharp, but the edge is over here, there's no real big point to it. Very, very thin steel. This blade comes very, very thin. They've ground it down tremendously. And, 440C is a decent steel. And I don't think it's a bad choice for this knife. I'll talk about, actually, let's go through the dimensions, and that's where I'm going to talk about how they ground this and what my opinions are on how they ground this knife. This knife, like I said, has a sharpness rating of 75 pounds of pressure to cut. 440C steel. The Rockwell hardness is around 59 on that. I talked about that it's a hollow grind. The cutting edge, there's no sharpness choil. I wish there was. The cutting edge is 4.65 centimeters, 1.83 inches. The blade length, so the tip of the blade to the closest spot on the handle, is 5.47 centimeters, 2.15 inches. And so this knife is said to have a 2-inch knife blade, so it's roughly that, but the cutting edge is 1.83. The blade thickness, well, the stock of the steel here where the blade is 3.5 millimeters thick. That's 0.138 inches. So good, nice piece of steel. The blade depth, that's this way, starting where the cutting edge is here. It's about an inch, 1.54 centimeters. The thickness of the edge behind the grind, well, I measured it about an inch down, actually closer to 3/4 of an inch down right there. And the steel behind that grind is 0.28 millimeters. That's 0.011 inches. By the time you get to the tip here, it's 0.24 millimeters, which is 0.0095. Very, very thin. It's only 95 thousandths up here. So that's a very, very thin edge. And then you've got a grind angle of 13.3 degrees on this side. And the side that says Boker, 11.4 degrees. So you've got a very narrow grind. Most utility knives, most EDC type knives are 20 degrees per side. This is less than 2/3 of that. just a little over half of that thickness. Very, very thin behind the grind. So that means, that's how you get this really, really sharp edge. But you also have a very thin edge, and that reduces a lot of what you can do with this knife. That thinness means it's weak, because steel, the thinner it gets, is weaker. So this is not a self-defense knife. Even if the handle was a really, really good, comfortable handle that with 4-finger grip and your thumb, like a full hand grip, if you still had this on the blade, even if it came to, more of a point like a spear point, if it had this edge, it still would not be a good self-defense knife, because that thing's going to break easily. If you work it hard, this edge will snap in some way. It'll chip off the edge. It's very, very weak. So this thing, what it's good for is it's for delicate little work, and not so much the tip work, because you don't have much of a tip. So it's just for delicate slicing through stuff. And, that's about all that it's good for. Maybe chopping up baby carrots. I don't know to be honest with you, and I'll stop being facetious, I really don't know what role this thing can fulfill. But it's cute, and it's sharp. It's a knife. I do like it. I can't help but like it. I just don't know what role it will safely fulfill, safe to the user, and effective without being hard on the knife, or too hard on the knife that it's destructive. Let's go over to the handle now. The handle length is 4.4 centimeters, 1.73 inches. The handle thickness is 1.16 centimeters. That's 0.454 of an inch, so a little less than half an inch thick. The handle depth, that's this dimension right here, it's the biggest, is 2.34 centimeters, which is 0.92 of an inch. And the grip area in here, this side offers very good grip. This not so much, but if you want to count it all anyways, it's around 4 centimeters, around 1.5 inches of grip. And that's all, unless you count a nice lanyard. And I'll show you a picture of a really good lanyard with this. And that offers a whole lot more grip, right? I think so. Total length of this knife is 9.65 centimeters, which is 3.8 inches. So there you go. It weighs 42 grams. And with the sheath, that is 70 grams. Oh, I didn't do the ounces. Ounces are on the screen. So it's a small knife with a light weight. It's very small around your neck. If you wear it under a shirt and do concealed carry, which, arguably could get you in trouble in Canada, but there's a lot of places where you can do concealed carry. And this knife is probably not going to get you in trouble anyways, even if you do concealed carry. As long as you're not doing something illegal with it, or something, hurting somebody with it. They're not, chances are very low, but I can't tell you what an officer's going to say or do. Anyhow, it's very small, very low printing on your, it's under my shirt. Nobody can tell I'm carrying it unless they see the chain around my neck. It's just so very, very discreet and tiny. How much does this knife cost? Well, there are loads of variables here. So there's variables with the kind of handle scales you can get. So there's at least 3 different kinds of handle scales. There's at least 2 different types of steel, and there's at least 2 different types of sheath. So how much are you going to pay? A fair bit, actually. Maybe too much, maybe not too much. It all depends. The lowest price in US dollars I found was on White Mountain Knives, because you can also get 10% off if you use my coupon code CCE at White Mountain Knives. Their regular price is $35.95 for this. They've got one with STAG handle, and that one is $44.95. Both of those have 440C. I looked on Amazon Canada, and this knife is $48. So that's less. If you figure in the exchange rate, that's less than the Americans have to pay on Amazon. So sometimes it's good to be Canadian. The STAG one was $62.50, but it had 12C27. Or you can get one that's micarta and a different steel, and it's $43.75. Or you can get an olive-handled one with 440C, and it's 57 Canadian. So the prices are all over the place. It looks like most of the Amazon prices are about the best in Canada. So I've spoken an awful lot about that. What are the pros and the cons on this? The sheath, Kydex sheath, is really good. I can't comment on how good the leather sheath is. So I like the Kydex sheath. Very functional, holds well. It's got good retention. It's a good sheath. I would like a sharpener's choil, even if it's just a very small one, but it's not that big a deal. I would like, when I sharpen this, I'm going to sharpen it to 15 degrees per side. I'm just going to give it more of an angle. I think it's just too shallow. I haven't used it very hard, but that edge already shows a little bit of damage. So the sharpening angle is too shallow. I want to bring it back just a little bit. 15 degrees per side equals 30 degrees altogether. With this really high grind, you can sharpen this thing for years and years and years, and you're still going to get a very thin edge. That's a pro if you'd like. You might want to grind this down as you're sharpening it, but if you do that, then you're going to have no guard, if your blade stops somewhere for your finger moving forward. There you go. So it's focusing on my knuckles, and just look how thin that cutting edge gets. That hollow grind for the last few millimeters there, the last 1/8 of an inch, it's very, very thin there. Very thin indeed. And then it starts getting thicker after that, and it slowly gets thicker up to the full thickness right there, because the flat comes up to about there. And then you've got the full thickness of the tang up there. So it's a good looking knife. It's just that I'm not sure how extremely useful it is. Do I have any more pros and cons that I wanted to mention? If you want a piercing knife, like I said, this is not piercing. The handle offers very little grip, like I said. So that can be a con unless you really don't care, because you're just going to use it in a very limited way. I do think that it's too much money for what you can actually do with it. Is it too much money for, what you get? That's all perspective. That's neither here nor there. It all depends on what you're thinking. It's not a terrible knife. It's just having, certain characteristics that really limit its usefulness. And so I don't like paying that much for this knife. I would not pay full retail for this, if that tells you anything, but we each have our own desires. We each have our own goals. I just want to tell you the pros and cons. I don't want to tell you to buy it or not buy it. That's up to you. So here's the knife. Let me now show you some pictures of other knives that Jesper Voxnaes has designed that are of the same basic style, but their size is different. I'm just going to give you still pictures along with some prices, and you decide, what you think of those things. So there you go. That's this knife. That's this main design. I do like Jesper. I follow his designs. Like I was saying earlier, the Polar is a really nice design, and I'm glad that they decided to make a large version of that knife. Thanks for watching my video. Thanks to my Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. You should have seen your money that you've donated at the 1st of April have been through the system already. Thank you so much for helping me out. The video for the winner of the Patreon supporters will be coming out in the next day or two, probably on the 3rd or 4th of April. For everyone else, thank you so much for liking my videos, sharing, commenting, subscribing, liking, anything that you do to let other people know about Canadian Cutting Edge. I really appreciate it. And remember, guys, always cut towards your chum, not your thumb.